This happened on my 13th dive, and I really did almost die. Welcome back to Dive Vibe. Today we are continuing our series of the scariest dives that I have ever had. If you tuned into the last one, then you know this is something that is not super comfortable for me. I don't think anybody likes to talk about their mistakes, but I feel like it is important that we talk about our mistakes, our near misses. And on the last video, everybody was actually a lot more supportive than I might have predicted. So I am going to continue with this series. So if that's something that you're interested in, if you like scary dive stories, then make sure you're subscribed because there are some good ones coming. I started diving around 2010, 2011 on Oahu in Hawaii. I've done at least 100 dives a year ever since then, and usually many, many, many more than that. So when I say that this was about 2,000 dives ago, that's a very conservative estimate. So I was a very new diver. Basically, I'd gotten certified like 4 weeks before that. I had the bug. I was in the military, I was a medic, but on the weekends, I was diving as often as possible, usually with other military guys that had just gotten certified. And when it comes to new divers, there's this thing I like to talk about called the Dunning-Kruger effect. And I would actually really like to make a whole video about this. It refers to the fact that people with less experience tend to have more confidence, and people with more experience tend to doubt themselves more, basically because they know what can go wrong. And it has a nice little line graph that kind of shows where your experience level keeps rising early on in your career of doing something like a hobby or a job. And then at a certain point, you kind of have this realization that you know nothing, and it drops way back down. This was one of those moments for me. So my wife had decided to surprise me with a boat dive. At this point, I'd only been on one boat dive, and I loved it. I loved not having sandy boots at the end of the dive. I loved being able to go deeper. I loved the better visibility that you get when you get a little bit offshore. When the crew at the shop asked her how experienced I was, she told them, "Oh, he dives every weekend. He loves it." That's true. I was diving every weekend, but I'd only been certified for like 4 weeks. So this was going to be my 13th dive. My 13th dive, and I ended up on an advanced charter with deep dives planned. Before this, I think my deepest dive was maybe 55 feet. This dive was 97 feet. And in my opinion, none of this is even the worst part. It gets worse. The day of the dive, get down to the dock, I'm loading my gear up onto the boat and I'm talking to the dive guide. And he asked me about my experience level, which is a very prudent thing to do as a dive guide. I was pretty obsessed with technical diving at that point, as you can probably guess. And unfortunately, I had stumbled across the PADI Tech 40 website and looked at the prerequisites. And there were a number of dives that you had to log before you would be qualified. PADI was the only agency I heard of at the time, so they were the only website I was looking at. You had to do a certain amount of dives deeper than 60, a certain amount of dives deeper than 100, and you had to get some courses done. So I figured, this is going to be a dive deeper than 60 feet. This is going to count towards my stuff. So when he started asking me about my experience level, I told him, well, right now I'm working on doing my prerequisites for technical diving. Now, to me, what that meant is if you look at the prerequisites for technical diving on the PADI website, I don't have all those. How he took it was that I was enrolled in a technical course and I was working on the basics. So he was assuming that I had rudimentary, foundational technical skills, which I did not. But I did have my own gear and a can-do attitude. But this, in my mind, that mistake from me, even though I meant it earnestly, I wasn't trying to deceive him, that mistake from me was probably the worst part. So now he's got a little more confidence in me. That is definitely not warranted, and that is not good. So we get to the dive site. It's a dive site called Two Holes. If you're a diver that frequents Oahu, you may have even dove it. It's a very cool dive site. Basically, you descend down a line. There's two holes that seemingly in the bottom of the ocean, and you descend through one of them. And once you're at the bottom of the little swim through, there's a cave to, I think it was the right-hand side, that typically has some white-tip reef sharks in it. And this was one of those days. There were 2 or 3 white-tip reef sharks in there. The guide actually asked me, he was like, swim over there. He wanted me to block the other side of the cave so that the sharks couldn't swim away, so that more people would be able to see them. I was not comfortable with that. It's a white tip reef shark. They basically eat crabs and stuff, so they're not super scary to me now. But back then I was like, I'm not going to corner an animal with teeth. No, I won't even do that with my dog. Anyway, that was what I thought the danger was, although I do remember feeling incredibly relaxed, and I was surprised by that. And I thought the sharks were the danger at that point, but the real scary thing was lurking right over my shoulder, and I had no idea. So I looked down at my computer while I'm looking at these sharks, and I noticed we're at 97 feet. So this is way, way deeper than I'm used to. There's a couple of things that you need to worry about when you're that deep. First being no decompression limit. You always have to worry about no decompression limit, but especially when you go down, when you're nearing 100 feet, your no decompression limit drops a lot. Once you get past 60, it really starts to drop off and it becomes a lot easier to get yourself into trouble. The other thing that you need to worry about is that you're going to be using your air a lot faster. This is something that I was taught in my open water class, but I wasn't like super aware of it because I hadn't seen it yet, if that makes any sense. So I was not expecting to be breathing down my air as fast as I was. So we're leaving the shark cave and we're swimming through a little canyon. And I remember it being a very quick swim, but at this point we've probably been down for 15 minutes. And I pull up my computer, check my computer, and then I look at my gauge and I've got about 700 PSI, maybe 600. Like I said, I was a new diver and I didn't know all that much, but I knew at that point that I was in trouble. I mean, who wouldn't? It's very simple. Red bad. So I swim over to my dive guide and I give him the hand signal. I actually don't see people use this hand signal a lot, but this one, meaning I'm low on air. He goes, what? So I show him my gauge and I will never forget the look on his face when he saw how much air I had left. His eyes were, he looked very alarmed, which made me very alarmed. But he pointed and he gave me a thumbs up. So he pointed to the downline. I see the downline. I swim towards it. I grab onto the downline and I start making my way up. At this point, I'm at about 80 feet with 700 or less PSI, which is not a good place to be. It's better than no air, but it's certainly not as good as the right amount of air. So I start making my ascent, and when I get up to around 40 feet, I see someone swimming towards me. I believe this was a dive guide from another group that was descending at the same time, seeing me move up the line probably way too fast. It didn't feel crazy fast. I remember looking at my computer and trying to watch the ascent rate, so I was probably on the edge of it, but definitely faster than I like to ascend now. He swims up to me and he's telling me to slow down, and I'm like, oh, I got a problem, buddy. And I show him my gauge and it's got 300 PSI left in it, which is not great. 300 PSI is particularly scary to me now because I have seen tanks that are fully empty and their gauge looked like they still had 200 PSI in them. That's one of the really good reasons to never let your tank get below 500 PSI, because when it's at 500 PSI, it might actually be at 300 PSI. Some of these gauges can have a little play at the end there and you don't always get a super accurate reading. So when he sees that my gauge is at 300 PSI, he points again. I'm getting pointed everywhere. And I see this bar hanging in the water about 10 feet above me. And it was a bar intended for deco stops or safety stops, so you could just sit there and hang on and relax. What it also had was a Regulator second stage on a 20-foot hose back up to the boat where they've got a tank with a first stage on it. And the guide handed that second stage to me and I switched to it. So at this point, I have way more air. The problem is effectively solved. I am basically safe. I've got a little bit of air in my tank so that I can make my ascent after I get in with my safety stop. And I think the smartest thing I did all day was I elected to take a little bit longer safety stop. I think I probably did 5 or 6 minutes instead of just the usual 3. But when I ended up back on the boat, I'm changing my gear over, kind of going over what went wrong in my head. And the dive guide gets back up onto the boat after he's finished with the other divers that were in the group, and he is livid, just laying into me. It was extremely embarrassing, telling me how dumb I was and how I was not ready for this charter in the slightest, and that I needed to enroll in a different technical program. I get it, a little bit unprofessional, but he's angry. Everybody's just human. I'm not worried about it. But on that ascent, I was very much in danger. If that second stage hadn't been there, which by the way, I don't see that often, you know, a backup second stage hanging from the boat on a 20-foot hose. If that hadn't been there, who knows what would have happened. I could have gotten, bent. I could have gotten a lung overexpansion injury. I could have drowned. I could be dead. And I feel like it's important to think about these types of things. Obviously, I've not done anything like that since then in my subsequent dives. But if there's anybody out there that is at the level that I was, please take this message to heart. Be honest with your dive guides about your experience level. Be honest when you're booking a charter about your experience level, and delete your ego. Ego always gets you into trouble. Obviously, you can't delete your ego. You have to deal with it, but be mindful of it. Try to make sure that you are doing your best to make decisions free of ego, because it will kill you. If you've ever had a dive that went sideways, I really want to hear about it. I would like to see a discussion in the comments about near misses so we can spread the word even more. So if you've had a wild dive like that, please leave it in the comments below. I want to know. This isn't the only dive that's shaken me, so I will leave a link to the first video at the end of this one, and you can check that out, and make sure you subscribe so you don't miss the subsequent videos. I have one that I think everybody needs to see coming up. As always, I'd like to take a quick second to thank Dive Vibes supporters on Patreon. They make videos like this possible. With the way YouTube's going these days, Patreon is the best way to support Dive Vibe if you would like to. So if you want to do that, follow the link in the pinned comment below and receive my eternal gratitude. Thanks for watching. Dive safe, and I'll see you in the water.